Hello, I'm Michael, and it's July 3rd, 2023, and I want to talk about Linux operating systems. There's been some talk over the last couple of years, and especially recently, about the nature of Linux operating systems in terms of community support and the way that they're put together in terms of their long-term viability. And what I have to say about that is Linux operating systems like Debian, especially the most recent released Debian 12, in my estimation, are going to be the way to go. Community-driven Linux distributions. I'm 100% behind them, always have been, but I haven't always followed the course in terms of the distributions that I've emphasized and that I've used. I've chosen in the past those Linux distributions that were very polished, well put together, and had a huge support network behind them. But sometimes you need to make the better principled choice rather than the more expedient short-term practical choice. And so my intentions is to convert over to Debian 12. I have tried Debian in the past, many years ago, over several years. And what I can say is that Debian is a solid operating system. When I say solid, I mean absolutely solid. I've tested it. The issues I've ran into in the past in terms of Debian's default install able to recognize hardware, different ports, different keyboards, Wi-Fi chips, you name it, that's been addressed in the latest release, Debian 12. And I've actually did a little work with Debian unstable in Debian 11 just as a test. And I can say that it's very solid and it's very well put together. And if you combine Flatpaks and FlatHub, then you can get the latest and greatest desktop software on desktop Debian 12. Now, there is the concept of Linux Mint Debian Edition, and I think that is a very neat idea. Yet, I would like to see the Linux Mint team do a lot more to address the polish issue in that particular distribution. The writing is on the wall in terms of the Linux distributions that are not community driven, the ones that do not source the majority of their inputs from the vast collection of volunteers from universities, engineering firms, scientific studies and research firms, from a variety of research institutions and universities and college students and professional level people who commit their time and contribute their time to open source. And so I think that when we look at it, those very popular Linux distributions that we like to talk about a lot, right? They source their code from Debian from the get-go. So all these years have passed and there has been a huge maturation in the Debian code itself and the Debian release process so that we have a much more reliable, rock solid, and Debian was already there, but also one that can work well with laptops and desktops, right? Now, it goes without saying that if you're wanting to run Linux on a laptop or desktop in 2023 and beyond, the best choice is not to get a laptop that comes pre-installed with a different operating system and try to put Linux on there. That was the way of doing things in the 2010s and before. The way to do it now is to get a Linux laptop or desktop from a company that makes Linux-based laptops and desktops. That's going to be the key to operating Linux in the most successful and productive way. Personally, I'm not there yet. My plan is that should conditions allow, my next computers will come from companies that make Linux laptops from the bottom up, like 100% designed for Linux. Because I know that we've already gone into the era of Linux when we talk about servers. Let me just rattle off the common names that I've said in videos before and everyone else has said. all the major servers at Amazon.com, all the major servers at Google.com. Every time you go to Google, every time you go to Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, you name it, even Microsoft Azure, they're all based on Linux. And so you got millions of these servers out there supporting cloud services, a $1 trillion industry, and all of it is based on Linux. All your smart TVs run a Linux operating system, right? And your Android devices, every last one of them is Linux based, right? And all your Chromebooks are Linux based. I could go on and on and on. There are numerous videos out there that cover that in pristine detail. But what I will say is that we're already in the era of Linux based operating systems. It's just a matter of seeing them in a more productive mode on laptops and desktops. So if you ever heard of Steam OS and the Steam Deck, right? Steam gets most of their development, right, for the Steam code and process from the Linux world. So the Linux world is the prime creator, the prime original source for many of these innovations that make their way into physical products like handheld devices and TVs and the like, right? So on the desktop, productivity already exists, right? It's how we can latch on to a Linux distribution that's going to be able to stay the course, right? And avoid the pitfalls and disappointments we've seen in the recent years with those distributions that are not community driven, right? I'm choosing my words very carefully, right? But those distributions that are not community driven. So if you're curious about where the direction is in the Linux world, this is my opinion, but yes, you do have Arch Linux, and that's a valid choice for some. You got SUSE Linux, that's a valid choice for some, but I would say that the majority are going to embrace Debian. Debian has tens of thousands of software packages already that you can install on it, and with FlatHub, like I said earlier, and Flatpak, there's now a much easier way for software developers to produce software and not take a year studying auto tools and the like, which those are still very important tools, but can get desktop software out there to end users in the form and fashion that the software developer would like. So we're about to see some tremendous innovation and growth with the open source technologies in the Linux realm. Think about OpenAI, even the very name OpenAI and ChatGPT, it all relates. Open source brought into existence a much more practical and useful artificial intelligence implementation. And then we can combine that with the operating system, right? And then you got Steam that has some virtual reality process that one of my colleagues told me about the other day, told me about last week. I was like, oh yeah, I had totally forgotten about that. And so when we're talking about virtual reality and augmented reality, all the tools are already there in the open source arena. So we're going to see tremendous innovation. We've already seen quite a bit over the last few decades, ever since Linux came into being. But we're going to see even more now because open source, hey, his last name is Keller. There's this dude named Keller who worked at Intel, and he's partnered up with a dude that used to work at NVIDIA, and they've partnered together. There's some video out there where they also agree that open source is the direction, right? So RISC chips, R-I-S-C, right? I hope I got that right? But RISC chips, looking at what RISC-V as the structure for those computer processors, I am very intrigued, and I am also very optimistic about the RISC chip and the RISC-based architectures that are based on an open source plan, and how just like ARM and how open ARM was, right? RISC is going to be even larger once it gets going. I know a Linux guy that I met personally here locally. He's been working with Linux for more than 20, maybe close to 30 years or something like that. And this dude is like a hardcore infrastructure. First time I met him, and I was talking about ARM this and, you know, M series this or whatever, right? I'm choosing my words carefully. But he was like, he didn't hesitate, right? He's one of those type of people. He was saying risk is going to be the way to go. So I know I said a lot of things here, but Debian and true open source is about freedom. And by the time you see this, and on the day that it's published, July the 4th, right? Remember, freedom is not just about the things that we talk about in society, but it also involves the tools that we use and what that freedom allows us in terms of innovation and the full expression of human potential. So thank you for tuning in, and I hope this message finds you well. Happy 4th of July.